July 14th, 1942. The dim glow of a single desk lamp pierced the haze of cigarette smoke in a cramped office at RAF Medmenham, Buckinghamshire. Rain pattered against the blackout curtains, a relentless drumbeat that matched the tension coiling in the air. Wing Commander Sidney Cotton leaned back in his creaky wooden chair, his fingers drumming on a stack of reconnaissance photos spread across the desk like a battlefield map. The room smelled of damp wool, stale tea, and the sharp tang of developing chemicals from the adjacent dark room. Cotton, a man in his mid-40s with a weathered face etched by too many high-altitude flights, stared at the images. Black and white glossies showed the sprawling Luftwaffe airfields in northern France, rows of Messerschmitt Bf 109s gleaming under the sun, hangars bulging with bombers. The Germans were ramping up for something big, their production lines churning out aircraft faster than the Allies could knock them down. "We've got to blind them," Cotton muttered to himself, rubbing his stubbled chin. He wasn't one for theatrics, but desperation bred innovation. Across the desk sat Flight Lieutenant Peter Riddell, a lanky intelligence officer with wire-rimmed glasses, perpetually slipping down his nose. Riddell adjusted them now, peering at the photos. "Blind them how, sir? Our bombers are taking a pounding just to get close. Last week's raid on Dieppe lost 8 out of 12 Lancasters, and that's before the flak even wakes up." Cotton pushed back from the desk and paced the narrow room, his polished shoes scuffing the threadbare carpet. Outside, the wind howled through the trees of the old manor house, carrying the distant rumble of a lorry on the muddy road. He stopped at a corkboard pinned with sketches, crude drawings of aircraft silhouettes, not the real McCoy, but fakes. "Deception, Peter. We've been playing catch-up since Dunkirk. What if we make them see what isn't there? Fool their spotters, their cameras, even their bloody radar." Riddell chuckled, a dry, skeptical sound that echoed off the panelled walls. "Deception? Like those inflatable tanks we tried in North Africa? The ones that deflated in the sand? Come on, sir. The Jerrys aren't idiots. They'll spot a fake from a mile up." Cotton wasn't laughing. He snatched a blueprint from a drawer, unrolling it with a crackle that cut through the rain's murmur. The paper depicted a bomber, a Halifax by the looks of it, but rendered in balsa wood, canvas stretched over a wire frame, painted in drab RAF camouflage. No engines, no armament, just a hollow shell light enough for 2 men to carry. Not inflatables, solids. Cardboard and plywood, reinforced just enough to hold shape. We scatter them across dummy airfields, make it look like we're building up forces where we're not. Their recon planes fly over, snap their pictures, and suddenly they've got a phantom squadron staring back at them. Riddell leaned in, his eyes widening behind the lenses. The lamp's light cast long shadows across the blueprint, highlighting the absurd simplicity. Wings that could be assembled in hours, fuselages that weighed less than a Spitfire's propeller. Cardboard bombers. Sir, this is mad. They'll laugh us out of the war room. What about radar? If they bounce signals off these things, it'll just show up as scrap metal, or nothing at all. Cotton's jaw tightened, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "That's the beauty of it, Peter. We don't just stop at visuals. We've got boffins at TRE, Telecommunications Research Establishment, working on something called Window. Strips of foil dropped from planes to scramble their Freya sets. But for the ground game, these decoys will draw their eyes first. Imagine it, a Luftwaffe pilot at 20,000 feet scanning the fields near Dover. He sees a field full of these ghosts, bombers lined up, ready to launch. He reports back, and suddenly the Huns are shifting their fighters east, away from our real push in the south. The door creaked open, letting in a gust of cool, wet air. Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham stepped in, shaking rain from his greatcoat. A veteran of the Air Ministry's Secret Intelligence Wing, Winterbotham was all sharp angles and sharper intellect, his eyes missing nothing. "Talking about toys again, Cotton? I heard the rumors from Whitehall. Cardboard Luftwaffe bait." Cotton straightened, unfazed. "Not toys, Fred. Necessities. We've decoded enough from Bletchley to know they're planning a counter-offensive. If we can make them chase shadows, we buy ourselves weeks, maybe months." Winterbotham hung his coat on a hook, the fabric dripping onto the floorboards. He crossed to the desk, picking up one of the photos and holding it to the light. The image showed a German airfield swarming with activity, ground crews swarming like ants around Heinkel He-111s. "Weeks? That's optimistic, but I've seen stranger things work. Remember the wooden horse at Troy? All right, show me the details." As Cotton explained, the room filled with the scratch of pencil on paper, Riddell jotting notes, Winterbotham nodding slowly. The rain outside intensified, drumming like Morse code against the window. You could almost feel the weight of it, the invisible web of lies they were spinning. Hours passed in that smoky confines, blueprints evolving into plans, sites near the Kent coast, teams of carpenters from local factories, even pyrotechnics to simulate engine exhaust at night. By dawn, as grey light filtered through the curtains, the first prototype was sketched to life. Riddell stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. "If this works, sir, it'll be the biggest con since the Trojan War." Cotton clapped him on the shoulder, his grin fierce. "And if it doesn't, they'll be laughing all the way to Berlin. But mark my words, Peter, these cardboard birds will fly us to victory." Little did they know, the real test loomed not in the air, but in the electronic eyes of the enemy. The Germans' Würzburg radar arrays, those massive parabolic dishes scanning the channel, would soon whisper secrets of their own. But for now, in the quiet before the storm, the idea took root, a fragile fleet born of desperation, mocked by many, but destined to haunt the skies. September 1942. The salty tang of the English Channel mingled with the acrid bite of sawdust and fresh varnish in a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of Southampton. Waves crashed against the nearby docks, their rhythm punctuated by the staccato whine of electric saws and the thud of hammers driving nails into plywood frames. Sunlight slanted through grimy windows high on the walls, casting golden beams across a cavernous space alive with activity. You could hear the low murmur of voices, Cockney accents from the shipyard workers pressed into service, their sleeves rolled up, sweat beading on foreheads despite the autumn chill seeping through the cracks. Flight Lieutenant Peter Riddell wiped his brow with a rag-stained black from blueprint ink, stepping back to survey the chaos. Dozens of men swarmed around half-formed shapes, elongated fuselages rising like skeletal beasts from sawhorses, wings splayed out on the concrete floor like fallen leaves. The air hummed with purpose, but beneath it lurked doubt, thick as the fog rolling in from the sea. "Steady on, lads," Riddell called, his voice cutting through the din. "That Lancaster tail needs to sit flush, can't have it wobbling like a drunk on payday." One of the carpenters, a burly man named Tom Hargrove with calluses like tree bark, paused mid-swing, hammer hovering. "Flush? With this lot? It's balsa and glue, governor. One good gust off the Solent, and it'll fold like a house of cards." Laughter rippled through the crew, rough and good-natured, but Riddell caught the edge in it, the unspoken fear that this was all a fool's errand, a distraction from the real war raging across the water. Wing Commander Sidney Cotton strode in from the loading dock, his boots echoing on the oil-slicked floor. He carried a clipboard under one arm, his greatcoat dusted with chalk from the morning's briefing. The warehouse smelled of pine shavings and machine oil, a far cry from the sterile offices of Medmenham, but it felt right, raw, unpolished, like the plan itself. "Morning, Peter. How's our Phantom fleet coming along?" Cotton's eyes scanned the room, sharp as a hawk's, noting the progress. 10 fuselages nearly complete, wings ready for canvas skinning, even a few mock Bombays carved from scrap wood. Riddell gestured to a nearly finished Halifax decoy propped against the wall, its drab green paint still tacky under the lamps. At a glance, it fooled the eye, stubby wings, twin tail fins, the RAF roundels stenciled boldly on the sides. But up close, the illusion cracked. No rivets holding it together, just dowels and fabric stretched taut. "We've got 12 airframes ready for assembly, sir. The boys from the local cabinet shops are a godsend. Turned out props from old table legs. But Hargrove's right. These things are light as a feather. 2 blokes can lift one, but will they stand up to a recon flight?" Cotton circled the decoy, running a hand along its flank. The wood was cool and smooth, painted to mimic the wear of operational aircraft, scuff marks from non-existent ground crews, faint oil stains simulated with boot polish. He knocked on the nose, the sound hollow, like rapping on a coffin lid. "They don't need to stand up, Peter. Just look the part from 10,000 feet. We've reinforced the undercarriage with steel struts, enough to take a truck's weight if we stage them right. And for the radar boys." He trailed off, nodding toward a corner where a team of TRE engineers huddled over crates of metallic foil and wiring. Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham had arrived earlier that week, his presence a quiet authority amid the sawdust. Now he emerged from the shadows, adjusting his tie as he approached. The engineers, young boffins in ill-fitting lab coats, their faces smudged with grease, straightened at his gaze. "The decoys themselves won't ping much on Würzburg," Winterbotham said, his voice measured, like a professor lecturing on quantum physics. "But we've rigged corner reflectors, simple metal grids folded into triangles. Bolt them inside the fuselages, and they'll bounce signals back like the real thing. From a distance, it'll read as a squadron of heavies squatting on the grass." One of the engineers, a wiry chap called Dr. Elias Thorne with ink-stained fingers, held up a prototype reflector. It glinted under the lights, aluminum strips arranged in a precise geometric dance. "Tested it last night on the Downs, sir. Our mobile radar set picked it up clean at 2 miles. The Jerry's Freya chains should swallow it whole, make 'em think we're massing for a raid on Calais." Cotton nodded, but his expression tightened. Outside, a lorry rumbled to a halt, its engine coughing like a chain smoker. Crates of paint and canvas tumbled out, handled by WAF drivers in crisp uniforms, their faces set with determination. The war had pulled everyone into its maw, typists turned welders, farmers crafting illusions. "Good work, Elias, but let's not get cocky. If a Ju-88 gets low enough for a close look, we're back to square one." The afternoon wore on, the warehouse a symphony of labor. Hammers fell in unison, saws bit through balsa with a whisper. Riddell oversaw the painting crew, watching as brushes swept across wings, adding the subtle weathering that sold the lie. Bullet holes patched with filler, exhaust stains trailing from imaginary engines. You could almost hear the phantom roar, feel the vibration through the floorboards, as if the decoys were stirring to life. By dusk, as the sun dipped toward the horizon in a blaze of orange, the first complete unit rolled out on wooden dollies. Hargrove and another worker maneuvered it toward a flatbed truck, the decoy's shadow stretching long across the concrete. "Bloody hell," Hargrove muttered, heaving with his mate. "Feels like carrying a kite to fight a dragon." Winterbotham watched from the doorway, a cigarette glowing between his fingers. Smoke curled upward, mingling with the fading light. "Kites won wars before, Tom. Remember the Chinese against the Mongols?" But even he felt the knot in his gut. These weren't toys. They were gambles, fragile shields against the Luftwaffe's steel storm. Cotton clapped Riddell on the back as the truck pulled away, headlights cutting through the gathering twilight. "First batch to the Kent fields tomorrow. Dummy sites near Folkestone, close enough to tempt their spies, far from our real bases." The engine roared to life, drowning out the waves, carrying the decoy into the night like a secret unbound. Riddell lingered as the warehouse emptied, the echoes of the day's work settling like dust. He traced a finger along the edge of an unfinished wing, the wood still warm from the lamps. Skepticism gnawed at him. Would the Germans bite? Or would this just be another footnote in the endless string of Allied Hail Marys? Outside, the Channel wind picked up, rattling the doors, whispering of storms to come. But in that moment, amid the ghosts of what might be, a spark of belief flickered. The cardboard fleet was real now, wheels turning toward deception's grand stage, October 1942. The crisp bite of autumn fog clung to the rolling fields of Kent, England, like a shroud over forgotten graves. Dawn's pale light filtered through the mist, casting ethereal halos around the silhouettes of ancient oaks lining the hedgerows. The air hummed with the low growl of a Bedford truck's engine, its tires crunching over gravel as it wound toward a secluded meadow near Folkestone. Dew soaked the grass, turning the earth slick underfoot, and the distant cry of gulls from the channel carried a salty tang that mixed with the fresh scent of turned soil and wet wool. Flight Lieutenant Peter Riddell gripped the truck's side rail, his greatcoat flapping in the chill wind, whipping across the downs. Beside him, Wing Commander Sidney Cotton scanned the horizon through binoculars, his face set in grim determination, the stubble on his jaw shadowed by the rising sun. The truck lurched to a halt at the field's edge, where a team of sappers, rough-handed engineers in mud-spattered coveralls, waited with stakes and ropes, their breath fogging in the cold. "Right, lads," Riddell called, jumping down with a splash into a puddle. "This patch of nothing becomes our stage. Unload careful-like, no snaps or cracks." The decoys emerged from the canvas-covered back like reluctant actors stepping into the spotlight. First came a Halifax mock-up, its plywood fuselage swaying gently as Tom Hargrove and two mates eased it onto the grass. The structure weighed no more than a grand piano, light enough to maneuver by hand, yet from afar it loomed convincingly. 4 engines outlined in painted black Bombay doors, sketched with careful brushstrokes, even faux machine gun turrets fashioned from tin cans wrapped in canvas. Hargrove grunted as he positioned it, the wood creaking softly under the strain. "Feels wrong, Gov, like dressing up scarecrows for the Luftwaffe's tea party." Cotton strode forward, directing the placement with sharp gestures. "Position them in echelon, 2 lines staggered like they're prepping for a sortie, and get those corner reflectors bolted in before the fog lifts." The sappers worked swiftly, their tools clinking in the quiet, hammers driving pegs into the soft earth to anchor the undercarriages, wires threading through the hollow bellies to secure the metal grids. Dr. Elias Thorne, the TRE engineer, knelt beside one decoy, his lab coat discarded for a wool jumper, fingers deftly adjusting the aluminum triangles inside. The reflectors caught the light in fleeting glints, designed to mimic the metallic echo of a real bomber's aluminum skin. "Aligned for maximum return on the Würzburg frequencies," Thorne murmured, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. "If their radar vans sweep this way, it'll light up like Blackpool illuminations." You could feel the pulse of anticipation thrumming through the group, the way the men's eyes darted to the sky, half expecting a Focke-Wulf to burst through the clouds. The meadow, once a grazing spot for sheep now scattered to higher ground, transformed under their hands. By mid-morning, 8 decoys stood sentinel, 4 Halifaxes and 4 Wellingtons, their wings casting long shadows across the dew-kissed turf. Riddell stepped back, hands on hips, the fog swirling around his ankles like ghostly vapors. From the tree line, it looked real enough. A squadron hunkered down, camouflaged nets draped loosely to blend with the hedgerows, even smudge pots filled with oily rags ready to belch, simulated exhaust come dusk. Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham arrived in a staff car just as the last net settled, its tires kicking up clods of mud from the rutted lane. He emerged, lighting a cigarette with a flick of his lighter, the flame briefly illuminating his lined face. "Impressive, Cotton. From the road you'd swear it's Biggin Hill's overflow." He exhaled smoke, watching as a sapper tested a decoy's stability, giving the tail a gentle shove. It held, barely quivering, the reinforced struts humming faintly. Cotton nodded, but his eyes remained fixed on the east, where the Channel haze met the French coast, invisible yet ever threatening. "It's the proof that'll count, Fred. We've got intel from Bletchley, Luftwaffe recce flights stepping up along the coast. If they bite, we'll know by tomorrow's signals traffic." The words hung heavy, underscored by the sudden bark of a fox in the underbrush, startling a pair of workers who fumbled a wing section. The day dragged on in tense labor. Lunch was cold sandwiches wolfed down under the trees, the men's chatter subdued, tales of lost mates over Dieppe, the endless drone of night fighters probing the darkness. Afternoon brought a test run. Thorne set up a portable radar transmitter on a nearby hill, its parabolic dish whirring to life with the electric whine. The team held their breath as the beams swept the field. Inside the truck cab, Riddell monitored the scope, green flickers dancing across the screen. "Contacts at bearing 045. Solid returns, sir. 8 pips, clear as day. Looks like a full squadron squatting there." Cotton allowed himself a tight smile, clapping Thorne on the back. "That's the hook. Now we wait for the fish." But as the sun climbed higher, burning off the fog to reveal a vast blue sky streaked with cirrus, doubt crept in, like the lengthening shadows. Hargrove paused in rigging a decoy's propellers, whittled from pine and painted black, muttering to a mate, "What if they send a low flyer? One burst from cannons and poof, back to the woodpile." Dusk fell early, the sky bruising purple over the downs. The team ignited the smudge pots, acrid smoke curling upward in lazy spirals, mimicking the haze of idling merlins. From the cab of a hidden observation post, a hay wagon repurposed with binoculars and a field telephone, Riddell watched the decoys fade into twilight silhouettes, their forms blending with the gloom. The air cooled rapidly, carrying the earthy scent of damp leaves and distant sea spray. Winterbotham joined him, sharing a flask of tea gone cold. "Nerves, Peter. This is deception at its purest, lying with shapes and shadows." Riddell adjusted his glasses, peering through the slits. "More like praying, sir. If it fools their eyes and ears—" He trailed off as a distant rumble echoed from the east. A merlin's cough, perhaps, or just the wind in the wires. But no, it grew. The unmistakable drone of piston engines, high and probing. Cotton's voice crackled over the radio from the hill. "Recce inbound. Due 88, bearing 092. Angels 12,000. Steady now." The team froze in their hides, hearts pounding like war drums. The drone swelled, vibrating through the ground, until the Junkers sliced through the clouds, a silver dart against the fading light, its twin engines a menacing growl. Cameras whirred in its belly as it banked low over the field, no more than 5,000 feet, wings tilting to capture the scene. You could almost imagine the German pilot's surprise, his goggles reflecting the ghost squadron below. Bombers in neat rows, smoke trails rising like invitations to battle. The Ju-88 circled once, twice, the slipstream rippling the nets, but the decoys held, their fragile forms unyielding in the downdraft. Then it climbed away, vanishing into the murk toward Calais, leaving only the echo of its engines and the team's bated breath. In the hay wagon, Riddell exhaled slowly, the tension uncoiling like a spring. They saw it, all of it. Winterbotham nodded, grinding out his cigarette in the dirt. "And tomorrow their high command will chase phantoms. We've bought time, gentlemen, time that bleeds them dry." As night fully claimed the meadow, stars pricking the velvet sky, the decoys stood vigilant, their cardboard hearts beating with borrowed life. The laughter from skeptics in Whitehall would fade, replaced by the grim satisfaction of success. But the real war of waves and whispers was just beginning, with radar's unblinking eye as the ultimate judge. November 1942. The chill wind off the North Sea clawed at the cliffs near Ramsgate, carrying the briny sting of salt and the faint, oily reek of diesel from hidden patrol boats slicing through the waves below. Grey clouds scudded across the sky, heavy with the promise of rain, as thunder rumbled in the distance like the growl of approaching Stukas. In the camouflaged command post dug into the chalky hillside, a Nissen hut, half buried under sod and netting, Flight Lieutenant Peter Riddell hunched over a trestle table cluttered with maps, signal logs, and a sputtering wireless set. The air inside was thick with the musty scent of damp earth and the sharp bite of overheated valves from the radio, its dials glowing faintly in the gloom. Riddell adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, fogged from his breath, and traced a pencil along the Kent coastline on the chart. The Folkestone decoys had worked. The Ju-88's flyover confirmed it, but success bred hunger for more. Intelligence from Bletchley Park whispered of German build-up, flak batteries repositioning, fighter wings shifting east to counter the threat of phantom raids. "We've hooked 'em," Riddell murmured to himself, the words barely audible over the crackle of static. But doubt lingered, like the fog banks rolling in from the channel. One slip, and the illusion shattered. The door banged open, letting in a gust that scattered papers like startled birds. Wing Commander Sidney Cotton stamped snow, early flurries from his boots, his face ruddy from the cold, greatcoat slung over one arm. Behind him trailed Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham, his pipe clenched between teeth, and Dr. Elias Thorne, bundled in a scarf that muffled his excited chatter. "Signals traffic's lighting up like Guy Fawkes' night," Cotton announced, shaking off the chill as he crossed to the table. His voice carried the gravel of a man who'd flown too many missions, each word weighted with the stakes. "Luftwaffe's pulling squadrons from Pas-de-Calais to cover our new bases. That's a dozen Bf-109s diverted from Dieppe, straight into our laps for the next raid." Winterbotham struck a match, the flare illuminating the hut's corrugated walls, shadows dancing across pinned-up photos of the decoy fields. He puffed his pipe, releasing a cloud of aromatic tobacco that mingled with the earthy dampness. "Bletchley's boys confirm it. Enigma decrypts show Goering himself rerouting assets. Your cardboard con is paying dividends, Cotton. But the Jerrys are no fools. They're sending Würzburg teams to verify. Radar sweeps along the coast, probing for the metal behind the mirage." Thorne leaned in, his ink-stained fingers tapping the map, where red pins marked decoy sites. The young engineer's eyes gleamed with the fervor of invention, his wool jumper frayed at the cuffs from nights tinkering in the lab. "That's where we shine, sirs. We've upgraded the reflectors, dihedral arrays now, tuned precisely to the Würzburg's 50 MHz pulse. Last week's field test near Dover. Our mock-up pinged at 3 miles, indistinguishable from a Lancaster's skin return. But we've added diversity, vary the angles on each decoy so the scope shows a squadron in motion, not statues. You could sense the electricity in the air, the way the men's postures straightened, fueled by the wireless operator's urgent Morse tapping in the corner. Outside, the wind howled through the wire fences, rattling the camouflage nets like distant machine gun fire. Riddell nodded, pushing back from the table to pace the narrow space, his shoes scuffing the packed dirt floor. "Expansion, then. We've got approval from the Air Ministry, more sites along the Thames estuary, dummy airfields at Canvey Island South End. Pull in the boffins from TRE full-time. We need these ghosts to haunt every radar screen from here to Ostend." Cotton unrolled a fresh blueprint, its edges curling in the humid air, depicting clusters of decoys. Wellingtons, with articulated wings for simulated taxiing, even mock runways of painted canvas over trenches. The plan sprawled across the table, lines intersecting like veins in a living deception. 20 units by week's end. Carpenters from the Portsmouth yards are shipping plywood by rail, lightweight, weatherproofed with linseed oil. And for the visuals, we've got searchlights from the coastal defences, angled to catch low flyers at dusk, make 'em think we're fueling up under cover of night. The group bent over the maps, voices overlapping in an urgent cadence. Winterbotham jabbed a finger at a coastal battery site. "Here, integrate with the real defences. If they bomb the Phantoms, our AA guns get a free shot." Thorne sketched quick diagrams, his pencil flying, reflectors hidden in engine nacelles, foil strips ready to deploy if a close pass threatened exposure. Riddell felt the knot in his chest ease slightly, the plan solidifying like wet clay under pressure. But as rain began to patter on the hut's roof, a tinny rhythm that echoed the pulse of distant artillery across the water, a runner burst in, face pale under his helmet. "Urgent intercept, sir." The lad, no older than 19, thrust a flimsy decrypt at Cotton. Luftwaffe Recce Wing. Multiple flights inbound at dawn, targeting the Folkestone spread. They've got mosquitoes on the prowl too, low and fast for visuals. The room fell silent, save for the rain's insistent drum. Cotton's jaw set, his fingers crumpling the paper's edge. Right. Alert the ground teams, smudge pots at full burn, rotate the decoys to fresh positions. Thorne, double-check those reflectors. If the Würzburgs light us up wrong, it's over. He turned to Riddell, eyes locking with a fierce intensity. Peter, you're with me to the forward post. We watch this play out. Eyes on the scopes. Dawn broke grudgingly, the sky a bruised slate pierced by shafts of watery light. From a concealed bunker overlooking the Folkestone meadow, you could taste the tension on your tongue, sharp as gun oil. The decoys stood resolute in the downpour, their canvas skins glistening, corner reflectors humming faintly as mobile generators kicked in below ground. Riddell peered through a slit in the concrete, binoculars pressed to his eyes, while Cotton monitored the field telephone, its lines snaking to the radar van half a mile back. The first signs came as a distant hum, swelling into the roar of engines, 3 Ju-88s, fat with cameras, slicing through the clouds at 8,000 feet. Ground crews, hidden in foxholes, ignited the pots. Black smoke billowed upward, coiling around the decoys like protective veils, simulating revving Merlins. The planes banked, wings flashing silver, their pilots no doubt squinting through goggles at the scene below, bombers dispersing, shadows shifting under the nets as sappers winched mock props into motion. But it was the electronic dance that decided it. In the van, Thorne's voice crackled over the radio. Würzburg sweep detected bearing 120, range 15 miles. Our returns feeding back. Steady. Got 'em. The screens in the bunker flickered to life on a borrowed oscilloscope, green blips blooming like lethal flowers, 8 strong contacts, pulsing with authentic rhythm. The German radar operators, miles away in their cliffside stations, would see a squadron mobilizing, urgent and real. The lead Ju-88 dove lower, no more than 3,000 feet, its shadow rippling across the field. Bullets? No. Cameras whirring, capturing the smoke-shrouded horde. A second plane followed, then the third, circling in tightening loops. One decoy's wing creaked under the downdraft. A faint groan lost in the gale, but it held. Riddell held his breath, the cold concrete pressing against his shoulder, the scent of wet earth and cordite from nearby guns filling his nostrils. Then, as abruptly as they'd come, the planes climbed away, engines fading into the murk toward the French coast. Cheers erupted in the bunker, ragged and relieved, Cotton pounding the table with a fist. By God, it worked! They bought it hook, line and sinker. Winterbotham, arriving via staff car through the mud, clapped Thorne on the back. Radar saw the phantom and believed. Signals will confirm, diversions inbound. By midday, as the rain eased to a drizzle, confirmation flooded in. Bletchley intercepts painted the picture. Luftwaffe High Command in a frenzy, flak trains rumbling east, fighters redeployed to guard against the imminent Allied thrust. The cardboard fleet had drawn blood without firing a shot. Dozens of aircraft shifted, supply lines stretched thin, all for shadows and echoes. Riddell stepped outside as the clouds parted, sunlight glinting off the decoys' wet surfaces, turning them into spectral guardians. The wind carried the distant thunder of real bombers outbound, their path cleared by lies. Laughter. The skeptics in Whitehall were silent now, their doubts drowned in the tide of success. But Cotton's warning echoed in his mind. One victory doesn't win the war. We build more. Bigger, better, the phantoms must multiply. As the team dispersed to new sites, the cliff standing sentinel against the sea, the deception deepened. Radar's unblinking gaze had been fooled once. It would be again, buying precious days in the shadow war where illusions cut deeper than steel. December 1942. The frozen bite of winter gripped the Thames estuary. where frost-crusted marshes stretched like brittle bones under a leaden sky. Snow flurries danced on the gusts howling from the North Sea, carrying the metallic tang of ice and the distant clamour of shipyards hammering away at Liberty hulls in the fog-shrouded distance. In a requisitioned barn on the outskirts of Canvey Island, its thatched roof sagging under a fresh dusting of white, the air thrummed with the urgent rasp of saws and the thud of mallets shaping plywood into wings. The scent of pine resin mixed with the oily reek of generators chugging in the corner, their exhaust venting through a patched chimney that belched smoke into the gloom. Flight Lieutenant Peter Riddell shivered as he stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots on the earthen floor, the cold seeping through his greatcoat like insidious fingers. The barn's interior glowed under strings of bare bulbs, casting harsh shadows across the expanding fleet. 24 decoys, in various stages of assembly, their skeletal frames looming like prehistoric beasts half buried in the hay-strewn ground. Workers from the Essex factories, dockhands and cabinet makers with frost-nipped cheeks, huddled around benches, their breaths visible in the chill, voices muffled by the wind rattling the loose boards. Wing Commander Sidney Cotton was already there, sleeves rolled up, directing a team bolting corner reflectors into a Wellington's belly. His hands, chapped and raw from the cold, moved with practiced precision, the aluminum grids clinking like wind chimes in a gale. "Faster on those mounts, lads," he barked, his voice roughened by the raw air. "We've got sights to seed before the thaw turns this muck to soup." The success at Folkestone had lit a fire under the Air Ministry. Now the Phantom Air Force was multiplying, dummy fields sprouting along the estuary like weeds after rain, targets to lure the Luftwaffe into overextension. Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham leaned against a support beam, nursing a mug of scalding tea that steamed in the frigid air, his pipe unlit for once in deference to the wood shavings everywhere. He watched Dr. Elias Thorne calibrate a new array, the engineer's fingers numb but steady as he twisted dials on a portable radar simulator. "Bletchley's latest decrypts are gold," Winterbotham said, his tone laced with grim satisfaction. "Goering's in a rage, calling our ghost squadrons a figment, but he's shifting flak divisions anyway. Your tricks diverted 3 Jägerschwader last week. Our Spitfires caught them flat-footed over the channel." Thorne straightened, rubbing his hands together for warmth, his wool gloves frayed from endless tinkering. The simulator hummed to life with a low whine, its screen flickering green in the dim light. "We've pushed the reflectors further, sirs. Phased arrays now, with variable resonance. Tune 'em to mimic engine warm-ups, a subtle Doppler shift as if the props are spinning." He demonstrated, flipping a switch. The device emitted a faint pulse, and on the scope, blips danced erratically, suggesting aircraft taxiing into position. You could almost hear the phantom roar in your mind, feel the ground tremble under invisible tires. Riddell crossed to the table, spreading a map marked with fresh pins, red for decoys, blue for real bases, black for confirmed German radar chains. The estuary's curves snaked across the paper, a deceptive labyrinth where lies could bleed the enemy dry. "South End fields ready for 20 units. We've trenched mock runways, even piped in exhaust from hidden diesels to warm the air. Thermal signatures for their infrared spotters." But as he spoke, a knot twisted in his gut. The scale was ballooning, and with it, the risk. One close inspection, one savvy pilot dropping lower than protocol, and the house of cards collapsed. The door creaked open again, admitting Tom Hargrove with a gust that scattered snow across the threshold. The burly carpenter hauled a crate of canvas, his face weathered like old oak, dusted with white. "Brought the skins from Tilbury, governors. Weatherproofed 'em myself. Linseed and wax won't sag in the sleet." He set it down with a thud, eyeing a half-built Halifax. "These birds are getting bigger. Last one near took 3 of us to shift. If the Jerrys bomb 'em proper, it'll be fireworks." Cotton clapped Hargrove on the shoulder, the gesture firm amid the cold. "That's the point, Tom. Draw their fire. Let our guns sing." But even he felt the weight. the way the wind outside howled like a warning, whipping the estuary into whitecaps visible through the barn's slatted walls. The team pressed on through the afternoon, the barn a hive of activity, hammers echoing like gunfire, paintbrushes sweeping drab camouflage over fuselages, reflectors slotted into place with satisfying clicks. Riddell oversaw the rigging of pyrotechnics, magnesium flares in mock exhausts, timed to burst at night like afterburners flaring. By evening, as darkness fell early and heavy, the first convoy rolled out, flatbeds groaning under their fragile loads, tires churning through the snow-slick lanes toward the Essex marshes. Riddell rode shotgun in the lead truck, the engine's rumble vibrating through his bones, headlights cutting twin beams through the flurry. Cotton followed in a jeep, Winterbotham beside him, the group's silhouettes etched against the dashboard glow. The sights awaited. Cleared paddocks disguised as airfields, hedgerows festooned with netting to break the outlines. Unloading in the pitch black was a ballet of shadows, decoys eased onto the frozen ground, sappers anchoring them with guy wires buried in the frost, Thorne's team wiring generators to pulse the reflectors at irregular intervals. You could taste the anticipation sharp on your tongue, mingled with the crunch of snow underfoot and the faint ozone whiff from the electronics. At the south end spread, under a sliver of moon, the decoys assembled into formation. Lancasters and Sterlings in V's, their painted roundels ghostly pale. Hargrove tested one by heaving its tail. It rocked but held, the struts creaking like old bones. "Steady as she goes," he muttered, breath clouding. Dawn crept in with a bitter edge, the sky lightening to steel grey as the team melted into hides, foxholes lined with hay, observation posts in derelict farm sheds. Riddell settled into one overlooking the field, binoculars fogging slightly, the cold numbing his fingers on the field phone. Static crackled from the radio. Würzburg, activity spiking. Multiple vans mobile from Ostend, heartbeats synced with the wind's moan. The decoys standing sentinel, their surfaces dusted white like spectral sentries. The probe came mid-morning, heralded by a low drone piercing the flurries. A pair of FW-190s, long-nosed fighters repurposed for recce, slicing through the clouds at 4,000 feet. Ground crews, fingers frozen on triggers, ignited the smudge pots. Oily smoke billowed, coiling around the phantoms in thick veils, simulating dispersal. The planes dove, engines snarling, one banking so low its shadow swept the field, rippling the snow. Cameras clicked in their noses, pilots straining for details through the haze. In the hide, Riddell gripped the phone, Cotton's voice tense in his ear. Reflectors hot, pulses sinking. The scopes in the rear van confirmed it. Blips solid, shifting as if the squadron stirred to life, props whirring in the electronic ether. The lead Fokker-Wulf circled tighter, its wings tilting perilously close. One burst of wind, and it might shear a decoy's wing clean off. Tension coiled like a spring. Hargrove, buried nearby, whispered a curse, his hammer clutched like a weapon. But the illusion held. The smoke masked the fragility, the radar fed the lie. The planes climbed after 2 passes, engines fading eastward, leaving only churned air and the team's ragged exhales. Confirmation trickled in by noon. Intercepts buzzing with urgency, Luftwaffe command ordering reinforcements to the estuary, bombers retasked from Norway to pound the Allied build-up. Winterbotham arrived at the site by afternoon, his staff car bogged briefly in the drifts before ploughing through. He surveyed the field, smoke still lingering like victory's haze. They saw an army in the sky, and bit hard. That's 50 aircraft diverted, flak crews exhausted chasing echoes. Thorne beamed, stamping warmth back into his feet, while Cotton allowed a rare grin, clapping Riddell on the back. "Your phantoms are bleeding them, Peter. Whitehall's not laughing now." As snow resumed its gentle fall, blanketing the decoys in fresh white, The estuary whispered of greater storms. The deception had scaled, illusions multiplying like viruses in the enemy's mind. But whispers from Bletchley hinted at escalation. The Germans adapting, probing deeper with night fighters and boffins of their own. The cardboard fleet endured, fragile yet fierce, buying hours that stacked into days, precious margins in the grind toward invasion. Riddell lingered as the light waned, the cold etching lines on his face, knowing the next test loomed larger, radar's gaze sharpening like a blade in the dark. January 1943. The relentless gale off the Wash battered the windswept dunes of Norfolk, whipping salt spray from the grey North Sea into stinging veils that blurred the horizon. Icicles clung to the barbed wire of coastal defences, and the air hung heavy with the brine of frozen waves crashing against shingle beaches, their roar mingling with the muffled thud of hammers echoing from a camouflaged hangar half buried in the sand. Inside, the space pulsed with frantic energy, lit by hurricane lamps that flickered shadows across walls of corrugated iron patched with tarpaulin. The scent of wet canvas and hot solder filled the confined air, undercut by the acrid tang of burning oil from a stove fighting a losing battle against the chill. Flight Lieutenant Peter Riddell pushed through the door, snow crusting his eyebrows, his greatcoat stiff with frost. He shook it off, breath clouding as he scanned the room. The Phantom fleet had grown monstrous, over 50 decoys in various guises crowding the space like a graveyard of wooden ghosts. Lancasters with articulated bomb bays, Sterling sporting fake radar domes from molded clay, even mock mosquitoes whittled from spruce, all reinforced with steel spines hidden beneath their painted skins. Workers, their faces gaunt from rationed winters, swarmed the frames, voices hoarse over the wind's howl, seeping through cracks. Wing Commander Sidney Cotton stood at the center, directing the installation of the latest radar countermeasures into a Halifax's fuselage. His hands, scarred from endless prototypes, twisted a screwdriver with grim focus, the metal grids inside the decoy glinting like exposed nerves. "Tighten those leads, Elias. Can't have the arrays drop out mid-sweep," he growled, his voice cutting through the din. The success of the estuary sites had ignited a frenzy. Now the deception sprawled across East Anglia, dummy bases seeding the path to the invasion beaches, drawing Luftwaffe eyes northward while the real build-up coiled in the south. Dr. Elias Thorne knelt nearby, his lab coat discarded for oil-stained overalls, fingers black with grease as he fine-tuned the phased arrays. The devices had evolved, compact units pulsing at variable frequencies, simulating not just stationary aircraft, but formations in flight, Doppler shifts mimicking taxiing and takeoff. "We've cracked the Würzburg Rees upgrades, sir," Thorne said, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold that numbed his toes. "Their boffins added side-lobe suppression, but our reflectors scatter just enough to overload it, ghost echoes cascading across their scopes like a swarm." Group Captain Frederick Winterbotham paced the narrow aisle between decoys, his pipe clenched unlit, a decrypt flimsy clutched in his gloved hand. The hut stove popped, sending sparks dancing as he stopped beside Riddell. "Bletchley's feeding us a feast. Enigma traffic shows the Luftwaffe in chaos. Goering sacked 3 commanders for phantom chases. They've committed 2 full wings to cover our eastern thrust, stripping defences from Normandy. Your illusions are carving holes in their wall, Cotton. You could feel the culmination in the air, thick as the fog banks rolling in from the sea, the weight of months of fragile lies pressing down." Riddell unrolled a master map on a trestle, pins clustering like battle scars. Over 100 decoys deployed, from the Wash to the Humber, integrated with real AA sites and dummy runways of ash and chicken wire. "Operation Titanic's the capstone," he said, tracing the lines with a chilled finger. "Hundreds more for D-Day diversions, parachute decoys, pyrotechnic bursts to fake airborne drops. But this," he nodded to the hangar full of heavies, "this keeps their recce pinned here, buying the Armada time to mass unseen." Tom Hargrove lumbered in from the loading bay, hauling a crate of foil strips for emergency window deployment, his broad shoulders dusted white. The carpenter's hands, wrapped in rags against the frostbite, set it down with a grunt. "Last batch from the mills, governors. These birds are tougher now. Plywood laminated with bakelite won't splinter under a glancing hit." He eyed a sterling decoy, its wings splayed wide, painted exhaust trails fresh and black. "Never thought I'd build an air force from kindling, but seeing those FWs turn tail last week makes a man believe." The afternoon blurred into a frenzy of final preparations. Saws whined through balsa, welders sparked blue arcs, fusing struts, Thorne's team calibrating arrays with portable scopes that hummed like angry bees. Outside, convoys idled in the dunes, engines idling low to mask the growl, ready to seed the final sights under cover of night. Cotton oversaw the testing, a decoy winched into position on the sand, its reflectors pulsing as a mobile Würzburg simulator captured gear from a downed van, swept the beam. The screen in the hut lit up, blips blooming solid and urgent, shifting as hidden motors turned mock props carved from oak. "Perfect echo," Thorne announced, the group's faces illuminated green in the glow. But tension coiled tighter as dusk fell, the wind shrieking through the wire, carrying the distant wail of air raid sirens from King's Lynn. A runner skidded in, helmet askew, face pale. Multiple contacts inbound, Luftwaffe heavies. He 111s with radar pods, probing the wash chain. Dawn raid suspected, Cotton's jaw clenched, the hut falling silent save for the stove's crackle. Full alert, position the decoys in dispersal, smudge pots primed, flares on standby. He turned to Riddell, eyes fierce in the lamplight. "This is it, Peter. If they buy the finale, we've shifted their entire order of battle." Night deepened, the hangar emptying as teams melted into the dunes. Riddell hunkered in a forward observation post, a slit trench lined with sandbags, the cold sand gritty against his skin, binoculars fogged by his breath. The decoys dotted the beach like a spectral armada, their forms blurred by camouflage nets dusted with snow, corner reflectors wired to buried generators that thrummed faintly underground. You could taste the salt on your lips, hear the waves gnashing like teeth, the anticipation a knot in your gut as the first probes pierced the black. The raid hit at 0400, engines droning low through the murk. A flight of 6 Heinkels, bellies heavy with bombs and electronics, navigating by Freya chains. Ground crews ignited the pots. Oily smoke erupted in geysers, coiling around the phantoms, while pyrotechnics burst in sequenced flashes. Mock engines flaring to life. The lead bomber dove, its shadow sweeping the dunes, radar beam stabbing out like a lance. In the post, Thorne's voice crackled over the field phone. Their scopes lighting, our returns flooding back. Overload confirmed. The Germans' Würzburg pods would show chaos. Squadrons scrambling, blips multiplying in deceptive swarms, drawing the bombers off course toward empty marshes. Flak from real batteries, hidden among the decoys, barked to life, tracers arcing red through the smoke, stitching the sky. One Heinkel banked too low, bombs tumbling prematurely into the shallows, explosions blooming orange against the waves. The rest pressed on, but confusion reigned. Their pilots radioed frantic reports of a massive buildup, urging reinforcements that would never come. The formation fragmented, engines fading eastward, leaving craters in the sand and the acrid reek of cordite. By dawn's watery light, as gulls wheeled over the wreckage of a downed wingman, confirmation poured in. Winterbotham arrived via jeep, tires spinning in the slush, his face etched with rare triumph. Intercepts confirm. They've retasked the entire 2. Fliegerkorps. Hundreds of sorties chasing our ghosts. Normandy's wide open. Cotton emerged from the trench, clapping Riddell on the back, the wind tearing at their coats. We did it. Cardboard and echoes shifted the tide without a single Merlin turning over. Hargrove hauled a damaged decoy upright, its wing splintered but spirit intact, grinning through chapped lips. No more laughs, eh? These birds flew true. Thorne packed his gear, the arrays cooling with faint clicks, while the team surveyed the field. Phantoms scarred but standing, their deception woven into the war's fabric. A spring hinted on the horizon, the estuary winds softening. The cardboard fleet faded into legend, dismantled for the push to Normandy, but their shadows lingered in Luftwaffe logs, diversions that bought months, spared thousands. Whitehall's skeptics? Silenced forever. In the end, radar saw not scrap, but an army, and believed, sealing the path to victory in illusions forged from wood and wire. The war shortened, wolf packs scattered by unseen hands, all from a laugh turned lethal.